Darkness had fallen, and a shimmering gold moon was veiled behind misty clouds as Nancy and Professor Martin walked through the woods toward the old cabin. "Who owns it?" Nancy asked. "No one. It's been empty and abandoned ever since I came to Grayton. Sophie used to bring a deck chair and a portable lamp out here on summer evenings to read and write." Suddenly, Nancy stopped with a gasp and laid a hand on Abel's arm. "Look," she whispered. A pale figure had just appeared among the trees a short distance ahead. It was wearing a hooded cape, as Sophie's ghost was said to do. Nancy could feel goosebumps rising on her skin as she recalled the unsigned message at the faculty club. This means someone from the spirit world is hovering near her. The specter seemed to sense their presence. It turned its head just long enough for Nancy to glimpse a ghastly white, witch-like face. The next instant, the pale figure flitted off among the clustering trees. "Come on," Nancy urged. "Let's go after it." Regular Drew.
Hello and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween! Welcome to our Halloween bonus episode.
We are back with another ghost story this year.
Yes, following in tradition. We just figured we might as well just keep going on the ghost stories until we get through all of them because we're going to have to eventually.
Yes.
Yeah, so this time we are covering the very first ghost story in the Ghost Stories series of Nancy Drew, and that's the Campus Ghost. I think it's definitely their strongest.
That was my thought as well while reading it. Not that it was great, but definitely that it's maybe the best of the ones that we've read so far.
There is a low bar.
Yes.
The bar is on the ground.
Yes.
And I do think that this passed that just a little bit.
Yeah.
Was it spooky at all? No. Was it kind of interesting at all? Not really. Did the writing sound anything more than just like someone reading out a grocery list? Barely.
Yeah.
But it did.
Yeah.
I think that's why I hated the other one so much, is like it literally sounds like you're reading a shopping list.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so like, and then Nancy did this, and then Nancy did that. And she discovered that the secret message was actually, I don't know. It was just like, that's it.
Yeah.
It's like it's basically not even a story. Like I would hardly qualify it as a story. This, I think, meets that criteria a little bit, although it is still really, really quick to the point where it's like there is still no frills. There's barely any description. We do get a little bit in there at one point.
Yeah.
But that's really it. Yeah. So I didn't love it. I didn't hate it like I hated the other ones, but I didn't love it. And I do think, Kori, that it really does seem like these ghost stories were intended to be like full-length mystery stories at one point. And that for whatever reason, I don't know why, they just decided to cannibalize a few.
Yep.
And put them into this book as ghost stories. I don't know. I'd be really interested to know the history of that.
Right.
But yeah.
Speaking of the history, I tried to look a little bit. I could not figure out who the ghostwriter was for this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if, I mean, it was in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that was another question I had. I couldn't figure out exactly when this was published.
Oh, 83.
Okay. I don't know why I was having such a hard time with it. I think because on Simon & Schuster's website, they only have a newer version of the ghost stories on there.
Oh.
And it said on Simon & Schuster's website that it was published on October 1st, 1989.
Oh. Well, there is just like the rest of the mystery stories, there's a Minstrel, a Wanderer, and an Aladdin edition with this. So that's just the 3 dates, because mine has all 3 dates printed in there of each version.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's probably where the 89 comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I also have an 87 date in here as well.
Okay, yes, I saw an 87 date, and then I also saw the copyright 1983 date. But then I was just really confused because my book is a minstrel edition, and it says first minstrel books printing July 1987.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
so I was really confused. Because minstrel would have come first, right? Like minstrel would have been the first printing.
Wanderer was the first.
Oh, Wanderer was the first. So I see. Okay.
Yeah, mine does have all 3 printing dates, and then below that it says copyright 83.
Okay,
Simon
that
and
makes
Schuster.
more sense.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Okay.
They have to make it a little confusing. Also, just to add to the confusion, there are 3 different volumes of ghost stories in the Nancy Drew universe. So, of course, we're reading short stories, and all the short stories that we've done so far in past years as well. All of them have been from this first volume, but there is also a Ghost Stories Volume 2. And then they did also in the early 2000s publish a Ghost Stories that was like part of the Girl Detective universe. So it's not like called Volume 3 or anything. It's also just called Ghost Stories. So yeah. I propose actually that maybe we try one of the Girl Detectives next year. I know we didn't really love that series, but they are more like 60 pages rather than this is like 20 to 25. Okay. And so I'm hoping that maybe just having more time to explain things might fix some of the issues. So who knows?
Well, and I bet they are spookier. Like I bet
hope so.
They tried to be spooky, because I feel like these are not trying to be spooky. And I do feel like this is a Harriet Stradmeyer Adams thing, is that she really didn't like the concept of the supernatural. It seems like, based on the things we've read that she's, produced, it just seems like she was really into the idea of Nancy debunking the supernatural, which I agree is also a great premise. No shade to that or anything. But once, by the time the Girl Detective series was around, of course, Harriet Stradmeyer Adams was deceased and no longer, in charge. And so it was also came out in the 90s, right?
Or early 2000s?
Early aughts, where we were much more into actually spooky things, making things spooky. It was a whole thing, at that time. And so I feel like there's probably a good chance that those are better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, this first volume of Ghost Stories that we're reading today was published a year after Harriet passed. And so by that time, again, I don't know who the ghostwriter was, but at that time it was still like her business partners that were very, very close to her and were very familiar with her preferences for writing. And so I feel like obviously that carried over a lot more heavily than it would have still in the early 2000s. So,
well, I wonder too, because of that whole time period, if the reason why these seem like cannibalized mystery stories is because there was that changeover at that time. And they're like, maybe they did have those laying around, and for whatever reason, they weren't going to use them for later on. Like maybe they had to do more original stories or I don't know. But maybe something was going on there, that these were Harriet's old outlines or something.
Possibly, yeah.
And they just got, they're pretty short already. Like let's just try to use them,
Oh, well.
We may never know. Regular Drews, we may never know, but
it's okay. Yeah. What do we do 3 words for these? I can't remember.
Sure, we can. I don't remember if we do either, but let's do it.
College.
Science,
yeah.
Can we, actually, instead of college, can we say professors?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I don't know, there's juicy drama there.
Yeah.
Like professors, science feels
or
right.
Chemistry. Yeah.
Chemistry, yes. Oh yeah, professors, chemistry, and then
plastic surgery. No.
Yes. Yes. Perfect, Kori.
There we go. Okay.
Cherry on top. Okay.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Do we want to start off?
Yeah. Do you want to start the summary?
Okay, sure. So, at the very start of this short story, Bess and George have just rushed back to River Heights to talk with Nancy after a dance at nearby Claremont College. Because while they were there and they were taking a walk with their dates by like this wooded creek, taking a break from dancing, they spotted a ghost. Apparently, this is like a well-known ghost at the school, like it's like a local legend. And purportedly, the ghost of science professor Sophie Hanks. This is her ghost, and she crashed her car into the creek on a stormy night 5 years ago. And after the crash, she completely disappeared. And ever since then, the spooky figure has been spotted in the area, and then ghostly lights have flickered in her old science lab. So, I feel like this is a good premise.
Yeah.
It does start off really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but good enough, Anyway, the dance isn't over, so Bess and George return, and Nancy is, of course, thoroughly intrigued at this idea that there is a ghost out there. So she decides to take Togo.
Yay!
Yay! Togo sighting, and see if she can go out there and spot the ghost herself. She ends up not seeing anything at the creek, but when she turns back towards campus, she sees the flickering lights in the science lab. So she ends up grabbing like a nearby security guard who's around, and they rush up to the lab, and it is locked, but the security guard has a key, so they open it and go inside. But it's dark and deserted. There's no one there, no more lights. So, that's odd. How could someone have gotten in and out of this lab so quickly without being seen?
Ooh. So Nancy goes home, and the next morning she starts telling Carson about her evening. And Carson starts telling her that actually he has been hired by a company called the Foster Drug Company to look into Sophie Hanks, this professor. Apparently, right before she disappeared, she made an important discovery, which would be how to artificially create this substance called fluorium pentose, I think, which they don't really say what it's for. I guess it's something that can be used in medicine, but it's previously something that's only produced in plants and was very, very difficult to create artificially. And so the process is now patented by Professor Sophie Hanks. And so so when she died, she left behind like her incomplete notes about her work, but the information about the actual catalyst for the process is not included in any of the information that they found. So basically, nobody knows how to recreate the substance, but this company, the Foster Drug Company, really wants to use it for whatever new drug that they're making. So basically, they have hired Carson to figure out, I guess, what the catalyst is, or track down somebody from the family, because apparently there's like no heirs possibly or something like that.
Well, because the situation is she was never declared dead.
Right.
Because she just went missing after the crash. Like, people presume that she's dead, but they never found her, so they never were able to. Because she's patented to this process, but we don't know her whereabouts. It's like they can't really do anything. They can't work out any kind of deals for like royalties or a situation without knowing what happened to her.
Right.
Yeah.
So Carson asks Nancy if she is willing to look into this for him, and of course she is happy to do so.
I just have to say, though, I don't think that that's how patents work. Don't you, when you apply for a patent, don't you have to like send them everything about your invention or process or whatever? I'm pretty sure like they would have to know the ins and outs of everything to do that in order to patent it, because otherwise what are you patenting,
There's so much about the story that is unclear or is just completely unrealistic. Like the fact that her lab is still sitting completely the way that she left it, unused.
5 years later.
5 years later. You're telling me that a week afterwards her university wouldn't have like flipped that and had other people in there? That's prime real estate. It's expensive to keep up a college laboratory. Of course they're going to use that space, not just lock it up forever in case she comes back from the dead. Okay, whatever.
I was surprised enough that they still had like her locker full of her stuff.
Right.
5 years later. I was like, there's no way nobody cleaned that. There's no way that no one wouldn't have cleaned that out.
Right.
Like.
So yeah, just another thing in the unrealisticness of this story. So yes, Nancy agrees to look into this for Carson. So she decides that she is going to go interview the dean of the science department, Dean Tapley. He tells Nancy that Professor Hanks was an absolutely fantastic professor, but she was not super well liked. And also, she had a childhood accident that left her a little bit disfigured. And so she had like a twisted nose, and her face was maybe not the prettiest in the world. So her students all called her the old witch behind her back.
This is horrible.
Yeah.
This is so bad.
Yeah. And it left her kind of, I don't know if bitter is the right word, but she was not the nicest person as a result of this. I would certainly be bitter if everyone was cruel to you for no reason, just because you weren't the most gorgeous person around.
It would certainly like give you an understanding of like, oh, okay, so everyone is awful.
Right.
Great.
Yeah. So really the only thing that she cared about was just her work and her scientific discoveries, but she's just maybe not the most pleasant person because of the treatment that she has received. And so, yeah, I guess there was only like one professor on the staff that really was like friends with her because of the, I guess, animosity created by that situation. You want to take it from here?
Sure. So she's talking more to the dean, and he tells Nancy that Professor Hanks's papers and records are actually still here in her locker at the college, but they've looked through them all, and there's no reference in any of them to what the catalyst for that experiment was. He does say that there were some letters in the locker as well from a friend named Vanessa Lee, but she never contacted the college, so they don't really know who she is. And so because there wasn't any reference to anything in her papers, they weren't able to like track down any other relatives. But actually, just a few days ago, this really weird random thing happened, and someone showed up named Alice Durand, who claims to be Professor Hanks's niece. She's staying in a nearby hotel, and he says that Professor Martin, Professor Abel Martin, who was Professor Sophie Hanks's only friend on the faculty, like you were talking about, that he knows where she's staying. So Nancy goes to talk to him. And Professor Martin says that he and Sophie, talking about Professor Sophie Hanks, became friends because she also enjoyed literature, and he's a lit professor, and he's like, oh, there's a side to her that other people didn't know about, you know, all this stuff, whatever. But he drops the bomb that he actually saw her on the night of the crash and thinks that she caused the crash like on purpose, like that she purposely crashed her car. He said that she had just returned from a science convention and that her paper on her fluorium pentose thing did not garner the reaction she was hoping for. And when she got back, she was just kind of like ranting about it and about everyone being against her, and then spent the rest of the evening brooding in her lab. And then, of course, later that night got into that accident. So he thinks that I guess she was just so worked up that she wanted to do herself harm. I don't know. He then offers to take Nancy to lunch and invite Alice Durand along so that Nancy can meet her. And so they do. And when Nancy meets Alice, she is like immediately not impressed. She thinks that Alice is only like a couple years older than her or something, and she thinks Alice has like a whiny voice, and basically heavily implies that she's only here now because she realized that her aunt's invention could be worth money, because she's clearly only talking about that. Like, when do you think this is all going to be sorted out so we can figure out this patent situation, you know? So interesting. And then during lunch as well, Professor Martin offers to show Nancy and Alice where Professor Marks used to live, I guess because Nancy thinks there might be a clue still there or something. But before they can, Nancy gets a call from the dean that Vanessa Lee, Professor Hank's friend, also just happened to show up today. How odd. So Nancy wants to go meet her first. So they all get up to like leave. They're like at this faculty club where they're having lunch, which never heard that before in my life, but must be a real fancy school. So they all get up from lunch and they go to leave. And I guess there's like some like letter boxes like outside, like pigeonholes for faculty members outside of this like lunchroom or something. And Professor Martin checks his, and inside there is an unsigned note for him saying that the reddish-haired girl that he's having lunch with so Nancy, has an aura about her that means that someone from the spirit world is hovering about her.
Ooh.
Spooky.
So after that little spooky excitement, Nancy goes to meet Vanessa Lee. We learn that she met Professor Hanks when she was in college in New Orleans. But Nancy notices that she weirdly has a Texas accent just like Alice, the niece. And so she kind of wonders if maybe like they're from the same area or something. But Vanessa also claims that she recently lost her memory and only just learned about Professor Hanks's death from the papers, just like Alice learned from the papers recently. So that's kind of weird. Apparently she also like travels a lot or is very well traveled or something, but she happens to work at a medical lab in a nearby town. And so Nancy's like, that's weird how someone could have all the money to like travel the world, but has just an hourly job or whatever. So at this point, Nancy decides that she should go investigate this lab where Vanessa says that she works. She actually goes and visits in person and meets with the lab director, and he confirms that Vanessa works there. She's a good worker. They're very happy with her, but nothing really suspicious about this. Doesn't really tell us a lot. That evening, Nancy gets back home and she gets a call from Professor Martin, who says that, oh, hey, I remember there is this shack out in the woods where Professor Hanks used to go to write poetry. All right.
Interesting.
So he invites her to go check it out with him, and they do, but it's nighttime now, so they are just like trying to navigate through the dark woods to get to this shack in the woods.
This is the only spooky part in the story, by the way.
Yeah. So as they're trying to navigate through, Nancy sees in the distance a pale figure wearing a long, dark cloak. And as she's trying to get closer, the figure turns its head and she notices that it has this like long witch-like nose, kind of twisted face. Okay, so this has to be the ghost of Professor Hanks, right? So they take off after it, but Professor Martin just like trips and falls and grabs Nancy on his way down, causing her to also trip and fall. So the ghost is able to get away. And by the time they get back up and look around with their flashlights, they cannot see anything. So it is gone.
So they explore this ramshackle old shed, and inside Nancy finds a box that has a bunch of handwritten poems. And inside is a piece of paper that says the last will and testament of Sophie Hanks.
Oh,
it's Sophie's will sitting in this box in the woods?
Yeah, obviously.
So random, so weird. Anyway, on this piece of paper, it says that Sophie intended to leave everything to her niece, Alice Durand. Interesting coincidence.
That's so generous of her.
So Nancy obviously takes this straight to Carson, who says he'll work on ensuring that the will is valid, right? It has to be checked before they can use it. And then Nancy calls Bess and George, because clearly Nancy is thinking something here. Nancy has the wheels turning in her head, and she asks Bess and George to try to tail Alice Durand with the help of a security guard at the hotel where the niece is staying. Apparently, the security guard just happens to be a family friend, which I thought was like a hilarious like aside and random part of this story. I just love that. And then the next day, Nancy goes back to Claremont College to investigate the lab more thoroughly. She ends up talking to the security guard, who says that there is actually a trap door from the cellar into the lab. But he is like, but there's no way anybody could be using that. One, they'd have to know about it. And two, it's locked. It's always locked. I'm very sure that it's locked. And Nancy is like, oh, okay, can we check? And they check, and it's unlocked. So,
yep.
Cool. So she's pretty sure that whether or not someone like came in that way or not, that's probably definitely how they were leaving so fast that no one could see them, right? Then Nancy calls someone named Dr. Norman Craig, and he is apparently the one who recommended Vanessa Lee for the lab job that she currently has. So Nancy like goes to meet him to ask about her. And she asks him, so like, why did you recommend Vanessa for this lab job? And he says, ready for this, you guys? He says that he rescued her after a boating accident at sea.
Yep.
He explains that she was the only survivor of this yacht accident during a storm. And she suffered from memory loss afterwards. So I guess what she was saying before wasn't a lie. This doctor confirms, yeah, no, she had memory loss. And he also says that in the hospital, she kept mumbling the words Brahma cattle, which I guess combined with her like Texan drawl made him believe that she must have been from the South, right? And then apparently she eventually did regain her memory, or at least claims to, but since the yacht was on this world tour or something, presumably she like lost all of her belongings on the yacht sinking or whatever. And so this Dr. Craig wanted to help her get a job so that she could, earn money. And so he recommended her to this lab job. So random. The most random story.
Excellent.
I promise you it's relevant later. I wouldn't just be telling you this random stuff if it wasn't relevant. Either. We'll get there.
Yes.
Do you want to take it?
Sure. So Nancy heads home and she starts telling all of this to Carson, who actually has heard of Dr. Craig before. And he starts telling Nancy, like, oh yeah, Dr. Craig, he's a really, really great surgeon. He's like one of the best plastic surgeons, actually. And Nancy's like, hold on, wait a second. Did you say plastic surgeon? And yes, he confirms, yes, plastic surgeon. And this indicates something to Nancy. Right. She figures it out right away. Of course, she doesn't tell us what she has figured out. But at this point, Bess drops by and tells her that she and George have been following Alice, and that led them to Professor Martin's house, which is where they are right now. And actually, George is still staking out the place. And so Nancy says, let's go right now. And Bess says, I need something to eat first. And Nancy says, that's fine, but you can only have 300 calories. Before we can go. Mm-hmm. But then she brings George like a bunch of sandwiches and snacks and cookies from Hannah and tells George to like eat up because she needs the energy. Yeah, great. So wonderful. So we go over to the stakeout where George is waiting. And Nancy decides that she is going to go knock on the door. So she goes and Professor Martin answers, but he is like reluctant to let her in because, of course, he has company. Alice is there. But Nancy just kind of like lets herself in and just kind of hedges herself through the doorway. And Alice is like clearly unhappy to see Nancy and is just like, well, do you have my money yet or not? Like, is your dad going to like verify that will, or like, how long is this going to take? And Nancy's like, oh, I just, I need to borrow a typewriter if you don't mind, just because I meant to write something down earlier and I almost forgot. And so can I just borrow your typewriter really quickly? And he's like, yeah, whatever. Just hurry. It's in my office. Go ahead. And so she comes back out and she's like, oh, yeah, sorry for my fib. And they're like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, I really just wanted to use your typewriter to see if I could compare the will that I found to like a sample of your typewriter to see if maybe it came from your machine. Which is, I guess, is what she's able to confirm because she also tells us that the security guard at the hotel found a gray cape or like a cloak with a hood and a witch's mask in Alice's room that morning. So it seems like Alice is trying to forge this will with the assistance of Professor Martin. So they obviously get very upset, but Nancy is not even paying attention because she is distracted by flickering lights on in the lab at the college. So Bess and George race out of the house, or Bess and George were not in the house. She races out of the house, grabs Bess and George, and they head over to the lab where there is an explosion.
Yeah, so they get to the door, they hear this explosion inside of the lab, so they bust in, open the door, and then they see Vanessa Lee wearing a gray cape, and I guess she had just been like blown back from this explosion that occurred from some experiment that she's doing. She's okay, but Nancy like crouches down next to her and she's like, are you all right, Professor Hanks? Like gasp! And Bess and George are like, what? Professor Hanks? And now we get this whole story. So Professor Hanks, well, some of this is told from Nancy, some of it gets told by Professor Hanks. Basically, we learn that Professor Hanks, after the car accident that she had, was washed out to sea via the creek, I guess, which doesn't seem possible if you've ever been in a creek. But
Just floating down the Mississippi right out to sea.
It's not like a river. It's a creek. They specifically say a creek. It's in the woods. There's got to be at some point someone gets caught on something. Like, anyway.
And presumably we're near Chicago. So how far does she float to get to the ocean? Thousands of miles?
That's so true, Kori. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Where the hell are we? Where are we?
Because Nancy's at home, so...
Yes! Claremont College is clearly close enough to drive to. I imagine it's like within 30 minutes, maybe an hour at most.
Oh my gosh.
But like... It's so wild. So yes, she gets washed thousands of miles down a creek to the Atlantic Ocean? Pacific Ocean? Could it be the Pacific Ocean?
The Gulf of Mexico?
They're in the center of the U.S. It could be anywhere. Where are they going? Where's the creek go?
Is she just unconscious this whole time and survives being washed out to sea?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but so she gets washed out to sea, and then she just happens to climb aboard an empty life raft from a nearby yacht crash. So nobody survived that yacht crash. Also, yeah, she gets washed down this creek for thousands of miles, and it maintains consciousness the whole time. So wait a second. Okay, I mean, like, generously, maybe she's in and out of consciousness. So, like, maybe she reaches the sea and happens to regain consciousness.
Just in time to find a lifeboat and save herself from drowning.
But, like, you're telling me that throughout the creek, there were moments where she was maybe conscious and she didn't stand up? Like, grab a hold of a rock or a tree. I mean, a creek is full of trees. Like, that's what a creek is. It has trees in it. Like, oh my God.
I feel like if you can pull yourself into a lifeboat, you can pull yourself up the bank of a creek.
Listen, I have never been whitewater rafting, okay? But I have seen videos of people whitewater rafting trying to get back into the raft to continue, like, after falling out. It looks so hard.
Yeah.
So this woman who has just spent days floating this river, creek, whatever, in and out of consciousness is able to use her upper body strength only to pull herself into this lifeboat. That it just happens to be there, by the way. Anyway, oh my God. Okay,
is it possible that it's one of the Great Lakes?
I mean, I hope so. For her sake, I hope so, because I can only imagine the kind of trauma one would have around water if you spent days going downstream in some river, unable to get out at any point. She didn't even drift over to the side. She didn't even drift to the shore, Kori.
She floated out to sea. I didn't even think about how ridiculous this was until now. Oh my God. I think they do specifically say the sea, but you could have a yacht on the Great Lakes, right?
I hope so.
I think so.
I hope so. Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna cry. This is so funny.
Anyway, so this Dr. Craig found her, which also, why is a plastic surgeon rescuing people from the water? Is he also an EMT? Is he part of the Coast Guard? Was he just on his own boat?
I think they said he's on his own boat and just happened to see her out there struggling.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember that, but okay, good. I was like, it's a plastic surgeon who does random water rescues on the side.
He's very altruistic.
Yeah, so he rescues her. Yes, she did indeed lose her memory. But he, as a plastic surgeon, noticed her, like, facial scars. And of course, she was, like, really beaten up from floating for days down this. And so he performs plastic surgery on her, right? To fix her scars, fixes her nose even, I guess, which is like, what kind of insurance did this lady have?
Oh my gosh.
So he does plastic surgery on her, fixes her face, so she doesn't look like she used to. She doesn't look like a witch anymore. She looks, I guess, enough like a supermodel that that she now can pass as Vanessa Lee, because also, by the way, Vanessa Lee isn't real, and and like prior to the crash, Professor Hanks had like made up because she was so sad, I guess, because she was so ugly.
Is that what happened? I was so confused. I thought she had dissociative identity disorder.
She does, Kori, but she's taken on the identity of this person who she made up before the crash. So she created this character of Vanessa Lee because she was so sad
about being an old witch
that she decided to pretend, I guess, just to herself, and send herself letters from this woman who was glamorous and had this like fabulous life where she would travel all the time, and she wasn't married or anything. She was just going to parties and I guess on yachts. Yike!
That's so sad.
It's really sad. I'm laughing so hard still. I gotta calm down.
Oh my gosh.
So she she was in a fugue state is what we were learning, and yes, took on the identity of this Vanessa Lee person. And so basically she's just been living the past 5 years being really confused or thinking that she's Vanessa Lee. And so when she was confused, she would just show up to campus and just wander around, I guess, wearing this cloak.
Mm-hmm.
Why is she wearing a cloak? Where did the cloak come from? Why isn't she just wearing normal clothes? Why is she wearing a cloak?
All her clothes are on this sunken yacht.
That's all she had. She just had a cloak yet. And so she would wander around like a ghost on campus. And then she would just like come to as Vanessa and not know how she got there. But now, Kori, this explosion that's just occurred has just like jolted her out of it. So she fully remembers that she's Professor Sophie Hanks. And also we realize that that's what like Sophie as Vanessa was mumbling in her hospital bed. She wasn't saying Brahma cattle, she was saying bromate catalyst. Because bromate is the catalyst that she never wrote down for this experiment. And now that she knows who she is, and her memories restored, I guess she's going to go on to be a rich and famous scientist like she always wanted.
A beautiful, rich and famous scientist.
Right. Because she's also had the plastic surgery, so... Oh my god, imagine. You... So you just, your memory is restored, and so you just go back working at this college, and then like the day one of like the fall semester or whatever, they're like, "Hi everyone, it's Professor Hanks," and they're like, "No, it's not.
She was a witch. She's ugly." Grotesque.
I guess it's been 5 years, so probably none of the students actually know what she looks like, but like, my god.
So she would go into this fugue state, remember that she was the professor, have the keys in her pocket, because by the way, the keys survived the 1,000-mile float trip to the sea, and would let herself in her cloak to her old lab, begin performing experiments, and then forget who she was. Come to as Vanessa and say, "Oh no, I need to go through the secret passageway to the basement that only Professor Hanks knew about. And here's the keys in my pocket."
And the one security guard.
So how does she know to let herself out with the keys that way, that she needed to be sneaky? Why didn't she just be like, I'm lost, I don't know where I am?
Oh, Kori, I don't know.
That's okay.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Too good. Too good.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, hilarious.
It's so
and
funny.
I am at least I was entertained, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it certainly wasn't spooky, and I certainly didn't find it as funny reading it as I did talking about it with you, Cor, because I feel like I just never realized
how ridiculous.
How she could have been washed out to sea from Chicago.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to say it was a Great Lake.
That's a generous interpretation, Kori.
That's the closest thing I can come up with. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have anything to say.
No, for me, it was just the best. You can have 300 calories for dinner, which is like...
That was,
barely a snack.
That was really it. Yeah. I was so mad at Nancy. Because Bess comes here, she's like, I'm starving. Imagine telling your friend you can only have 300 calories?
I'm going to sit here and count while you eat. Like, what are you talking about, Nancy? Leave her alone.
Do you remember? Oh my god. Now I'm like having diet culture flashbacks.
Uh-oh.
Do you remember those little, shoot, what were they? I think they were like Nabisco or something.
Oh, the 100-calorie packs.
Yes!
The snack
the
packs.
100-calorie snack packs!
Mm-hmm.
Yes! Thank you for remembering. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I just remember
they still
being
make
like,
those.
You can have 3.
Yeah.
Just like throwing them. Imagine eating 300-calorie snack packs for dinner.
You'd be starving.
Oh my god.
Those things were so pathetic.
They were so sad. There was like 5 little crackers in there. Oh my god.
Oh, awful.
So there was that. But the only other thing I think I have to say about it is we never learned who left that note in Professor Martin's, like, pigeonhole.
Yeah. They don't explain a lot. I guess it just had to be Alice that got sneaky somehow, or the professor himself, Professor Martin. Maybe he left the note for himself, honestly.
Maybe. Yeah, that makes more sense. But yeah, I'm just like, why would someone leave a note saying that there's someone in the spirit world hovering about? Like, what's the intention?
Right.
With that?
Just to scare Nancy off.
Okay. I guess, yeah.
Surely Professor Martin, the friend, surely he tripped on purpose in the forest because it was Alice posing as the ghost, right?
Exactly.
To knock Nancy down so that she could get away in time. Yeah. So I just assumed that it was him trying to play it up a little bit, but they do not explain it very well. And there also was not like a lot of opportunity for him to send himself a note unless he did it like in advance and somehow knew that Nancy would freak out.
Let me see. He may get up at one point. Let me see. No, he doesn't. But it's just Nancy that gets up because she gets that phone call from the dean. So, I mean, potentially you could put it in there when she, was... Because otherwise he would have had to do it, like... Because they go to lunch directly after she meets him for the first time.
Right.
So he would have had to know that she was coming in order to put it there before. But she got up at one point, so presumably could have put it in there then. But
interesting.
Yeah.
I think we just needed maybe double the amount of pages, and then we could have had time for a little bit more explanation, a little bit more of a clarifying ending, and maybe 1 or 2 more hauntings, and then that would have made it a great little story.
I agree. Totally agree, Kori. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say.
I think that's really all there is to possibly be said about this one. So short.
Quick little story.
Yeah.
But fun. A fun time, I think, in retrospect. So, yeah.
Do we do mini flashlight keychains?
Certainly. Let's do it. I feel like as a ghost story goes, this is a 5-star ghost story.
Right.
So far. But I don't want to compare it to those. Because those are literally 1 flashlight.
Right. Ghost House might have been a little bit better, but...
Right, maybe we gave that a 2 or 3.
Greenhouse Ghost was awful, though.
Real bad. I feel like I'd give this a 3.
Yeah, I was thinking 3 as well.
I feel like it's a solid mystery, definitely goofy, has a spooky moment, not spooky enough for a ghost story, but still good.
Premise was solid.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. I think if it had been a little bit longer, we had a little bit more time with the spookiness of it, I think it would have been good. So, 3 stars.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yay.
Well, happy Halloween, regular Drews. We'll see you in the next episode.
Yes, happy Halloween.
Thank you for listening to Regular Nancy Drew. Email us at regularnancydrew@gmail.com.
If you like this episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Regular Nancy Drew and Twitter at RegularND.
You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons at the $3 level vote on upcoming episode topics and get exclusive access to our Scoop Sesh series.
And all patrons receive early access to each episode as well as weekly bonus content.
And to all you regular Drews out there,
thanks for listening.